I know that we're very tight on time, so I will not hurry up trying to give you the main idea. But what I'm going to do now is talk about a theoretical framework we're developing to explain how information handling emerged as an issue. By information handling, we understand information processing, what people call computation, information storage, which is memory, and information transmission, communication, covering at the same time the syntactic, semantic, and pragmatic flavors of information. So I would bet that all of you have already heard about some of these theories on the screen. And even though they look very different in their assumptions and mathematical descriptions, all of them explore the idea that life is information. However, none of them has explained how information handling emerged from simple chemical interactions. And here's where idea starts, because we would like to explain how primitive control mechanisms in life might have evolved. And of course, don't get me wrong, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We know that there are very, very brilliant ideas before us. And from these previous frameworks that I mentioned, maybe we can take something in order to describe information handling. Particularly, our model is very inspired by this man, Sean von Neumann. After his death, someone edited and published these notes where he proposed a minimal condition that machines should use in order to self-replicate. And this von Neumann's work inspired of the great minds such as Gregory Chaitin, who a decade ago, a bit more than a decade ago, in fact, proposed the idea of metabiology, which is modeling evolution as a computational process. And more recently, years later, Hector Senil's group extended Chaitin's ideas to explain open-ended evolution. And basically, at the end of their paper, as you can see in this quote, they also mentioned this bijection between evolution and computation. So all this is theoretical stuff. Is there any experimental result that can be relevant for explaining information handling? The answer is yes. This guy, Juan Pérez Mercader, he was the first keynote speaker in this conference, show that chemical reactions can be thought of as molecular recognition machines, which do not need biochemistry to mimic the behavior of recognizing automata belonging to different classes in the Chomsky's hierarchy. So the idea is very simple and elegant, according to me. Suppose that you have this reactor, you have a chemical mixture inside, and you can add a sequence of other reactants. This sequence of aliquots, as he called them, are essentially other chemical components. And then you can use some chemical signature in order to see if this sequence that you put was accepted or rejected. And this is exactly the same principle that abstract automata like Turing machines use in order to work. That's how our computers work. Basically, everything is based on accepted or rejected something. And he showed in that paper that there is an equivalence between different classes of automata and different classes of chemical reactions. The simplest automata, finite state automata, is equivalent to a bimolecular reaction. Fusion automata is equivalent to a pH reaction. And linear bonded automata, which is a class of Turing machines, because a Turing machine requires an infinite memory tape by definition, is equivalent to a Belousov-Sabotinsky reaction. And at the end of this paper, all these experiments were carried out in vitro, and this is experimental work. We found this quote where the authors point out that these experimental results enlighten a path for the sequential hierarchical origin of information handling in nature and the transition from non-biochemical to biochemical computation. So inspired in all this work, which is theoretical, and also inspired in this stuff, which is experimental, our proposal is that computation started with the emergence of autocatalytic bimolecular reactions. As Pérez Mercader explains in his paper, this task does not require counting or memory, so it is simple enough to have a curve in pre-biological environments. And at this stage, these entities that are living in environment are only capable of self-replication using natural resources and a simple description encoded in the environment. And you can imagine these trivial replicators, we call them like that, as a crystal. Basically, the algorithmic information of their description is lower than the structure it describes as such. And the next level of complexity are PDA, push-down automata. We claim that they emerge given the diversity of chemical species in the environment. Basically, now we have a slightly more complex chemical networks interacting. And this transition from bimolecular reactions to more complex chemical networks demarcates the appearance of a primitive form of information storage by the environment, because now the environment can store information through these more complex chemical processes. And given that push and automata recognize more complex sequences, as Juan Perez Mercader showed experimentally, these entities now are capable of developing extra functions, like, for example, cell-preserving behavior, or maybe propagate mutations, where the mutations would be slight variations in these more complex chemical reactions. And in this way, we can talk about some primitive form of Darwinian selection, and this can be seen as the beginning of open-ended evolution. And the next level of computational complexity are linear bounded automata. Here we have two non-excluding paths that can arise linear bounded automata. The first one is coupling of different push and automata. Suppose you have two different chemical networks, and these different chemical networks get coupled by some process, and then you create a more complex chemical network, and this can be seen as a linear bounded automata at some point. The other option is complexification of one particular push and automata, which will lead you to a more complex chemical reaction, because now PDA are capable of a primitive form of Darwinian selection. And yeah, this will at some point create a linear bounded automata. Remember, these two are non-exclusive. And in both cases, both the coupling and scenario and the complexification scenario, chemical automata need to communicate in order to cooperate, to interact, to be coupled, or to transfer information to the next generation. So this era, according to us, sets in motion what we can call transmission of information, both in the peer-to-peer and also in the generational sense. And in this world of finite state automata, fusion automata, and linear bounded automata, all of them chemical reactions interacting in a dynamical environment, the appearance of digital messengers is not totally unlikely. You can imagine this process as a synergistic process from the environment and from the chemical reactions, because now there should be some messages who are very, very important, and therefore are crystallized as a digital messenger, and therefore things like RNA or DNA can appear at this stage. And of course, you can ask, okay, when you are talking about finite state automata, it's trivial that they will self-reproduce if they are if there is a bijection between these and autocatalytic bimolecular reactions. But how can you assert that these more complex chemical reactions, PDA and LBA, will self-reproduce? Well, our work proposed this cycle, which is based or construct in different works that I will mention barely. First, the environment tries to approximate solutions to the adaptation problem by means of observability. Here, of course, you can say, okay, you not only need computation, you need robust computation. And this first part is highly inspired by the work by Avi Prost on dynamic kinetic stability. This basically is a type of stability which works like a fountain. You need a source of energy in order to maintain your robustness. And in this case, the environment is proportionating that energy to the entities. Then the automata, which in our project is chemical networks, try to execute the instruction to be the longest running machine. And this generates a nested loop of computation, which in terms of construction translates as replication. The second part is based on this Hector Senil's work that I mentioned, where they show that you need undecidability in order to have open-ended evolution. And this other part is inspired by a paper by Hirosayama published more than 20 years ago, where he mentions that there is an equivalence between the halting problem and the process of replication in von Neumann constructors. So after all this, you can ask, okay, I can buy this, but what's new in your idea? Why should we buy yours and not all the other stuff that is in the marketing? Well, first, remember that biological phenomena happens or exists at many scales, like is shown in this diagram, from the molecular complexity to the high-level holobiont complexity. And additionally, we know that life is not totally sequential. These models, finite state automata, fusion automata, linear bounded automata, Turing machines, all of them are sequential modes of computation. But life is not totally sequential. We have recurrence, we have some kind of parallelisms. So what can we do in order to attack this particular nuance? Well, we know additionally that there are equivalences between different modes of computation, including these sequential modes of computation that we use. We have lambda calculus, we have logic gates, we have partial recursive functions, and these equivalences are very, very well studied, as the first speaker mentioned it. And essentially, the possibility of describing in nature any algorithm by a means of a Turing machine, which is known as Church-Turing thesis, together with these multiple equivalences among the different models of computation, makes it feasible that our ideas allows us to portray life not only in a primordial way, but also at other evolutionary stages, which means that you can represent different phenomena of life using different equivalent models of computation, and therefore the notion of emergence disappears because we are now looking at different models of computation to represent different aspects of life. So this was pure experimental stuff. Is there any way to test our ideas? The answer is yes. For example, using the BC reaction, which is equivalent to a linear bounded automata, it is possible to devise active synthetic polymer vesicles which self-reproduce and evolve primitively. This is work by Juan Pérez Mercader. He talked about in the first keynote lecture. And the answer here is, it is possible to synthesize vesicles using simpler reaction like a pH chemical reaction, which is equivalent to a push and automata, or using a simpler reaction, which is the precipitation reaction that he showed is equivalent to a finite state automata. If yes, if it's possible to devise these vesicles using these simpler reactions, then what are the new abilities that they possess? If not, if we cannot synthesize complex stuff like vesicles, what are the type of structures that we can synthesize, and what are their abilities? The same research group by Juan Pérez Mercader has obtained these 3 reaction diffusion equations that I think he showed, and these are capable of representing 4 important properties in life: information processing, metabolism, cell replication, and evolution. As you can see in this diagram, the solutions to these equations show the phenomenology of a generic living system. And the main advantage is that this system of equations was built one property by one. So basically, you can get rid of any of these. For example, you can get rid of metabolism and evolution, and I say only with information processing, cell replication, and then you can ask, what kind of phenomenology is obtained by solving this new system of equations? Are these results consistent with the theory in the sense that the more properties you add, the more complex the structures, the more these properties I listed before you obtain? And of course, you can also add more complex characterization, right? For example, what about information storage? Can we put in these equations information storage? That's also something that we can do. And finally, there is a parallelism between the classes of chemical automata I mentioned and the classification of entities characterized in a recent paper. Is this paper, I think you cannot see it, but it's from 2023, last year. It was written by people like Matthew Edberg, Martin Hansig, Hiroki Sayama too. And basically here in this paper, they propose something called viability-based behavior, which is used to describe how behavior evolves in early life. And our claim is that together with a description of how information handling appear, viability-based behavior is a good candidate to explore how agency has emerged. Because of course, if we have the hypothesis that you can explain agency using physicochemical processes, then before studying the origin of agency, you should study how information is handled by physicochemical processes too. So this is a good candidate to explore this agency, and maybe also to model something called scale-free cognition by these different models of computation I mentioned before. And that's it. To summarize our work, essentially, our theory explains the origin and early evolution of information handling in proto-habitable environments. It's based on experimental results and also inspired by ideas of many other people. Very important here, we don't claim from what moment life has arisen, because our view is more gradualist. And when you have a gradualist point of view of life, you cannot point out at one point saying, hey, life is there. No, you can arbitrarily define that life started with cell replication, with open-ended evolution, with compartmentalization, but we don't do that because we are using a gradualist point of view. So our model is agnostic of even which life could have arisen in the universe, like the period, because many people claim that maybe happened at the very beginning of the universe through the temperature and other properties that you have in that era of the universe. Also, we are agnostic of where life can occur, because these proto Turing machine that serve as environment running all these programs can be found in many ways, maybe in the moons of Jupiter, or maybe in, not sure, in another planet that has a different atmosphere than us. We do not claim anything about the materials that life needs in general. And this is clear since the experiments by Juan Pérez Mercader are agnostic of biochemistry. Also, finally, being compatible with the free energy principle, the next speaker will go deeper in this free energy principle. In our paper, we have developed what is maybe the first computational and activist theoretical framework capable of describing life's origin to high-level cognition throughout these equivalences between different models of computation. I know that usually computationalism and activism are seen as two very different ways to describe the world, but this guy, Thomas Korbach, a PhD student from Sussex, he showed that if your ideas, if your theoretical framework is compatible with the free energy principle, then you can combine computationalism and activism in what he called computational activism. So that's it. I would like to thank these three persons. All of them have reviewed our work. You can find the latest version of our paper here. Juan Pérez Mercader is the first keynote speaker. As I mentioned previously, he's working in Harvard. Luis Bocha, he was my professor. He's in our department in New York. And David Wolper, professor at the Santa Fe Institute. Maybe we won't be able to attend questions now because we are very tight on time. I'm doing my best. But if after reading this you have any suggestions, criticism, please let us know, because we want to listen different opinions from different persons, because what we are developing is more like a dialectic dialogue when we want to find symmetries or invariance stuff between all different perspectives. So yeah, just go ahead, write us. This is my email. And that's it. Thanks so much.